A dynamic and insightful speaker, Jeff Bush is known for his unique ability to translate difficult and confusing and fiscal information coming out of Washington into winning growth strategies for business owners, executives, and high net worth investors. Jeff is a colleague of Andy Friedman and an integral part of the Washington Update, the nonpartisan experts of all things Washington, D.C. Jeff presents more than 200 times yearly in the U.S. and abroad, to a client base that includes a who's who list of Fortune 500 firms from Wall Street to Main Street and everywhere in between. Jeff is a 28-year veteran of the financial industry. By the end of his career on Wall Street, he was managing a $50 billion business. Before that, Jeff was the youngest managing partner in the 150-year history of the New England Financial.
Democrats believe that capitalism, by definition, favors the wealthy, and that the federal government has an active role in redistributing that wealth. The current modus operandi of the Democratic Party is to redistribute that wealth via the progressivity of the U.S. tax code. Wealthier Americans disproportionately sharing in any tax increase. Well, Republicans quickly retort. They say Democrats have it all wrong. It's all about economic growth. Anything that we do as a federal government to overburden job creators or wealth creators only thwarts that growth. We need to be backing ourselves out of that equation. And right now we know who won that theoretical argument, at least for the next 4 years. Republicans have won that tax dialogue. We know we're heading to a lower marginal tax rate environment.
Great presentation. I think what it does, it gives you insight into what's really going on in Washington in a nonpartisan way. And I think when you have insight as to the story behind the story, you can make better decisions and inform your clients on what's next, and also just kind of a better understanding what's going on in the country.
But what I want to spend the majority of our time is talking about these legislative agendas that Donald Trump has put forward. As I mentioned earlier, he has given us a cornucopia of things to talk about. But there is also a reality that we need to understand. Yes, the Republicans control the House, the Senate, as well as the White House, but there are two checks on any runaway Republican agenda. There is an element of history or appreciation for the traditions of the Senate. The Senate was always meant to be a deliberative body, and therefore if you can't convince 60 Americans that it's a good idea, maybe it's not a good direction for our country.
Best lectures I've seen on a political front in a long time, and I'd highly recommend that anybody have the opportunity to listen in. You'll be smarter for it and more informed when you're done.
Well, let me see if this sounds familiar to you. Have you ever heard a story about one of these business owners paying themselves a very low W-2 wage through the year? At the end of the year, they pay themselves a big distribution. Does that sound familiar? Why do they do that? Payroll taxes. We only pay payroll taxes on that low W-2 wage. And that low W-2 wage can be manipulated because I'm the owner and the employee. Well, the Republicans and the Democrats both agree that that's a tax dodge. The Republicans say that 70% of the earnings going through my LLC should be subject to those payroll tax limits. Keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the employee and employer versions of those taxes, so it's not an insignificant number. And it goes right to my retirement strategy, what I call my 3-bucket strategy. You see, when I retire, I want 3 equal buckets of money. I want a bucket of taxable, a bucket of tax-free, and a bucket of tax-deferred. That way I get to manipulate the tax code for my lifestyle rather than the tax code tell me what my lifestyle will be. Here's the sad reality that none of us have any control on whatsoever. We know the average client's going to spend 30 to 35 years in retirement, right? You tell me, what 30 years is that client going to spend in retirement? What's their tax rate going to be over that 30, 35 year period? The reality is your financial advisors don't know, you don't know, the client doesn't know. Nobody knows. That's why there's value. There's value because it's about having a multitude of income generation opportunities in retirement so the client can manipulate the tax code for their lifestyle rather than be dictated to them. One of my biggest concerns for Americans heading to retirement, to the extent that they have saved for retirement, is that almost 100% of their savings is in one place. Where is it? 401k IRA. One tax strategy when they retire. I think value for higher income, higher net worth people moving forward is educating them on that reality.
Jeff is a completely compelling speaker. He obviously has so much to say that's just based from clear knowledge of the situation, and he's just one of those compelling speakers who there's not enough time that he could be allotted to give all the knowledge that he knows. He's got to totally make it compact because he has so much viable to say.
But our dialogue gets a lot more interesting when we start talking about corporate and businesses. I realize a lot of people that you work with directly own their own practice, and certainly their clients are primarily business owners. What Donald Trump would do is lower the maximum corporate tax rate from the current 35% all the way down to 15%. More interestingly, he would apply that to pass-through business owners. I imagine a lot of your clients, certainly in the independent space, own their businesses or as LLCs or sole proprietors or S-corps. That means their maximum tax bracket would now be 15%. That is a huge change within corporate tax policy. Obviously, one I would personally welcome. If we're going to talk about tax or spending, we need to understand the fiscal realities that we face right now. You see, 2016 was a watershed year. It was a watershed year because it was the first year in 8 years we started to grow our budget deficit once again. As a matter of fact, the federal budget deficit was projected as of January of last year that we'd end somewhere around $544 billion of annual budget deficit. That's 2.9% of GDP. But the CBO said, be careful though, understand long term, it's expected by 2022 it'll be up to 4.4% of GDP. And by 2026, it'll be up to 4.9%. Ladies and gentlemen, this is before the $3 trillion in additional debt that Donald Trump wants to add to our spending. I'm not saying it's a bad spend, I'm just suggesting that we need to understand what it is.